Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So I'm finally going to start my full car reviews, this time starting off what is arguably the worst car of update 1.40, the Tesla Model 3. However, to spice it up a little bit, I've decided to actually give it a little bit of fair competition by bringing in the older Tesla Model S. This car has been a day one vehicle. Again, previous to this update, it was the only Tesla that we actually had in GT7, and I thought, do you know what, it's not really fair just putting the Model 3 straight out there for me to just rinse it. I kind of want to give it an open shot at being a decent car, so why not just compare it to the older model of Tesla? So the first things first, we're going to have a look at the car prices themselves. As you can see, for the Tesla Model 3, the Performance 2023, we can get this one for 55,000 credits. I believe it's the cheapest car of update 1.40, and overall it's just a cheap car in general. 531 brake horsepower, 582.67 performance points. Moving on to the Model S though, we're looking at a price increase this time around, 92,000 credits, 410 brake horsepower, and overall a PP rating of 536.56. So a bit of a difference there, considering that one costs more than the other. So let's get on to the main stock review. So how do we do this? If you've never joined me before, we take them around a one lap hot lap of the Nordschleife and put them head to head, and then we'll see at the end where overall they rank on our hot lap leaderboard. So for both of these laps that you're going to see sort of cut up together here, I could not tune a single thing on the vehicles. They have to be how they leave Brand Central or any other dealership. Then we'll do a hot lap around the high speed ring to test out the maximum performance version, so fully upgraded, everything done. Once again, no fine tuning because that can be quite unfair between certain cars. So let's discuss the Model 3 anyway. First and foremost, this is the one of the latest additions to the game, 1.40 update. This thing came along and it was kind of, you know, everybody kind of groaned and sighed and such, whilst there was a few odd people that were really happy to see the Tesla in game. I could really understand whilst the majority was saying this is a bit of a wasted vehicle to come to the game. However, since update 1.40 changed up the custom race payouts and such, I guess in a way EV vehicles have more use than they do previous. So I go into these reviews with an open mind, and I have to try and keep it that way so I don't just instantly hate on the car. So as a vehicle, how bad is it? It's actually not that bad at all. I'm not going to lie, the Tesla Model 3 feels actually rather fantastic. Four-wheel drive in that vehicle, full power straight away, obviously battery powered from the EV. So really, overall, it's not a bad vehicle. It's just a bit heavy and a bit clunky looking for my liking. So in terms of its looks, I'm not a huge fan, but in terms of its performance, it is actually much better than I expected, and I guess overall it does kind of have a use. Now let's compare it to the Model S. I don't like the look of this vehicle at all. I just do not like this car. I never have, ever since I saw it for the first time in GT7. Obviously EV, once again, for me it just looks like a bit of a cheap Jaguar knockoff, and in terms of performance it's just nowhere near as good. Obviously not four-wheel drive unlike the Model 3, but in terms of just the performance deficit that's there, it just feels very slow, very heavy and very sluggish. But that's going to bring me back to the Model 3. I expected this to feel much heavier and much clunkier than it actually was. I expected the performance to really kind of be the massive downside of this vehicle. But in terms of its handling, pairing that with the full battery power, the four-wheel drive and such, it was much more maneuverable than I overall expected. I really cannot complain. So in that sense, the Model 3 does exceed my expectations, whereas the Model S that we had in the game previous to this was just absolutely terrible in pretty much every sense. There is no real redeeming factor for the way that leaves the factory. It feels boring, it feels clunky, heavy, whereas the Model 3 is kind of the opposite of that, where it feels rather quite nice to drive. It feels very maneuverable, and okay, we haven't got the addition of sound with any of these vehicles That's why I kind of gave them to each other to kind of go in a head-to-head showdown. But in terms of the standard one, which one would I go for? Well, obviously I'd go for the Model 3. Do I think overall the Model 3 is a bad vehicle and a complete waste of time? In all honesty, no. Surprisingly enough, it surprised me that much that I kind of turned away from my kind of dislike of EVs and realized, yeah, there is a little something about that vehicle that is slightly cool. I'm not going to go to the point and say that it's amazing. I'm not a huge fan of Teslas. I really don't massively care for them. But in terms of what I expected for the car and what I got from the car, the Model 3 is worlds apart from what you're seeing here, which is the Model S. The Model S, I just cannot like it. I cannot say it's got a redeeming factor. I just think as a standard car, it looks a little bit cheap. It just looks like some kind of tacky Jaguar of the time, but electrified. Obviously a lot older than the Model 3 that we're seeing here, but just in terms of the way it drives, there is just no redeeming factor. It's heavy, it's clunky, and it's slow. Whereas the Model 3, you can throw it around and you can probably find yourself having some fair bit of fun just throwing it around tracks like the Nordschleife here. And that's the thing, I didn't find myself bored on my lap of the Nordschleife, whereas the Model S, I was just kind of waiting for the lap to be over and done with. So in terms of a head-to-head with each other, the Model 3 is going to take it for the standard version. No competition at all there. But in terms of exceeding my expectations, yes, this is perhaps still the worst car of update 1.40, but overall, is it the worst car in the game? No, not by a long shot. It's actually a decent vehicle to drive. So let's move on and have a look where the overall lap times kind of got to. So Nordschleife lap times, as you can see, the Tesla Model 3 falls under the 600 pp category of cars that we've tested, and it comes overall a surprising 7th place with a time of 7 minutes 36 seconds, 0.871, just slightly beating out the likes of the SRT10 Coupe. However, it almost beat the Nissan GT-R Premium Edition, so there is a ton of performance there, and that definitely was rather quite surprising from where I expected this car to kind of roughly sit at. Yes, it's weighty, yes, it's rather quite bulky, but definitely the four-wheel drive and the instant power delivery helping it there. The Model S, on the other hand, also falls in the 600 pp category, however, came dead last. It didn't even beat the likes of the GR Corolla, which was our previous last place. It couldn't beat the Type R FL5, and as you can see, it still comes in with a rather hefty, performance point rating gap between the likes of the GR Corolla and obviously the Civic. So yeah, really kind of an underperforming vehicle, not one I'd recommend. Perhaps the most boring lap of the Nordschleife I've ever done. The Model S, in its standard form at least, was just a disappointment in every single way. So let's move on to our fully modified vehicles. Of course, we're not going to leave them standard. We're going to get the full aero on them, full upgrades. The only thing, like I mentioned, that I cannot do is fine tune them. In terms of the Model 3, which you are seeing on screen here, a lot more in terms of aero items and such than I actually expected, which was a rather pleasant surprise. You can make it look like the Pikes Peak version, even if I can never ever take it, remotely serious with that huge diffuser on the back. And then obviously we have the Model S, which again you can make look like a rather decent looking car. As you can see, I've got mine sort of GT4 styled here, a little bit less in terms of the aero options, but still, a fair amount that you can kind of differentiate it from the stock version. So not too bad, but the Model 3 is going to take away points from the S there. So let's get on to these laps. I'm going to do them one by one this time because it's such a short lap at the high speed ring. They're both fully upgraded. They are both at their maximum potential, running the same compound of tires, which is the racing softs, and the Model 3 is obviously going to go first. Now, this car here, with its full downforce and customized suspension, aero, everything, felt very, very good. I'm not going to lie. The four-wheel drive on this vehicle, whilst it doesn't quite have the top end, and that's a downside in terms of these, both of the EVs really, you cannot improve the overall top speed, but in terms of its cornering ability and pairing that with obviously the four-wheel drive system, the Model 3 was definitely outperforming my expectations at every single corner. It felt very, very good. Again, we've stripped the weight out of it, so it's not as heavy as it was previous, and it really does add to making it feel like a performance performance EV, you know, almost turning it into a little kind of EV touring car. That's how good it felt. It felt very, very good overall. Again, fairly boring lap, just mainly because there's no sound accompanied to the vehicle, but in terms of the overall performance, it was much better than I expected once again. So in all honesty, once again, the Tesla Model 3 is outperforming my expectations and will probably outperform yours as well if you give it a try when it's fully upgraded. Next up, we're going to have the Tesla Model S, and that's going to appear in a minute, but I do want to kind of touch on that vehicle before we kind of, you know, dive into the footage. It's still not great, I'm not gonna lie. The Model S is just one of those cars that no matter what you try and do, just feels like it's just completely lacking any sort of personality, any sort of potential to be a good car. Whilst okay, there's a ton of grip, it's just hitting such little top speeds, topping out I think around about 130 in comparison to around about 155 with the Model 3, that it's just a very, very boring lap. It's a very boring car to drive. Even with the aero added on, yes, it goes around the corner as well, but it's just a very, very boring vehicle, and I just cannot get to grips with how to make this thing any type of appealing. Where the Model 3 has the four-wheel drive system and this doesn't, I thought, okay, maybe it'll be a bit more lively, but no, you just add the aero and it just completely grips itself and won't really do anything remotely that resembles fun. In all honesty, my worst car before I tested the Model S and GT7 was the Porsche VGT Roadster, which is an EV model, obviously with the top chopped off and all that. However, I think the Model S quite comfortably takes the position of the most boring and worst car I've ever tested in Gran Turismo 7. So it really does make the, you know, EV Tesla Model 3 look rather, you know, like a shining gem in comparison to itself. So a very boring lap, no real performance potential there. So let's go ahead and obviously check out the overall lap times. In all honesty, I cannot sit there and say I like the Tesla Model S at all. So in terms of the Tesla Model 3, it comes overall 14th, which again, it's kind of let down by its top speed, but in terms of its cornering potential, it's absolutely fantastic. It does beat the Garage RCR Civic, another car that is once again let down by its top end, and just narrowly misses out on beating the Toyota GR Corolla, which took us into the 1-minute 10s. In terms of the Model S though, it's a little bit further down in 18th place, as you can see here. Runs on the racing soft, they all do. 1 minute 20.267, actually being beaten by a fully upgraded Alfa Romeo Giulia, which was a very big surprise. I mean, if we have a look at the cars that surround it in terms of performance points, this thing should be at least beating that Alfa Romeo. So it just kind of says how bad it really is there. So overall, is the Tesla Model 3 the most, I guess, worst car of update 1.40? Of course it is. There were so many amazing options that came in. However, is it as bad as I expected it to be? Absolutely not. For some reason, I just appreciate this car in its fully upgraded form. I think there's a lot more you can do with it previous to the previous Tesla that we had, which was the Model S. So there we go. Yes, it's the worst car of update 1.40, but it's definitely not as bad as you probably expected it to be. Model S, on the other hand, is just absolute trash. Do not bother with that car. Don't waste your time on it. It's terrible. It's more expensive. If you really kind of feel the need to have an EV race or something, head towards the Model 3. It's better in every single way. The Model S is now officially the worst car I've ever driven in Gran Turismo 7. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.